Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick again from Blind. And today we have Brad Porter, who's the founder and CEO of Collaborative Robotics, which only emerged out of Self last year. Collaborative Robotics' goal is to redefine how we think about robots, literal robots. Imagine a world where robots are a trusted extension of our surroundings, working, adapting, and reacting around us, and not the other way around. And if anyone can help us create this livable future, I'm sure I'm going to put my money on Brad. He previously spent 13 years at Amazon, where he was responsible for everything from developing the global website platform, that's Amazon.com, to driving a unifying architecture for Amazon's e commerce tech stack. Most recently, he was a vice president and distinguished engineer working on some of the most ambitious projects like Prime Now, Prime Air, and you guessed it, the robots. So thanks for coming on the show, Brad.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And just to kick it off, Brad, what made you decide after being with Amazon for so long and doing so much great work to say, hey, I'm going to start something new? Because that's a gutsy call. That's a brave call. And a lot of, I think, people on Blind and, across all industries are going through this now. Like, what do I do? Do I stay where I am? Do I leave? Do I pivot? Do I reinvent myself? And you did it. So maybe you could talk a little bit what made you make that decision.
Yeah, I had an amazing experience at Amazon, an amazing career at Amazon, and so it wasn't an easy decision to decide to leave, and it wasn't and like anything, a lot of different factors go into it, but you know, from a career standpoint, I had spent the first 10 years of my career um, at Netscape, and then as kind of the early engineer at Tell Me Networks in hypergrowth startup in Silicon Valley. And I really wanted to get back to it. And it helped that my wife grew up in the Bay Area and she wanted to get back. And I had daughters who were middle school age. And so it was kind of the right time to transition. And then COVID came along. And so everyone was okay with me working remote as I figured out how to move myself back and my family back to the Silicon Valley. So the timing just kind of the stars aligned. And I said, I really want to get back into hypergrowth. As amazing as Amazon was, it was also clearly becoming a very big company, and it wasn't quite the same insurgent, scrappy startup that frankly, it still felt like in 2007 when I joined, even though it was, I don't know, 10, 12 years old at the time. It had that kind of insurgent startup feel, but it lost some of that, and I wanted to get back to that. So I didn't go straight to starting my own thing. I joined Scale AI as their CTO to help them build out their product portfolio, and super amazing team there, super exciting. Did that for a year and a half, and then decided I was itching for something new and different. And I had long wanted to do my own startup. Even from my days at MIT, I had been part of the entrepreneurial competitions. I'd wanted to do my own startup, and I never really quite had the guts to do it. And then I realized, you know what? It's an amazing time to be a builder. It's an amazing time in Silicon Valley. I happen to know a lot about robotics. I think I have an idea how to bring robotics really out to the world in a much wider scale, and couldn't imagine being more passionate about doing something like that for the next 20 years. And that's so yeah, again, everything kind of aligned, and I said it's time to do it. It's time to start my own company.
What's so interesting, Rick, I don't know if you pick it up on this too. I noticed you didn't even talk about like the money aspect or getting like crazy, filthy rich from, the startup. It was more, hey, my family, it worked out that I'm going to be able to, be with the kids, have a better situation. And then also just trying something new, which is interesting. So you're coming from it from, I think, from an interesting place where most people, I would think from the outside, hey, I'm going to do the startup because I'm going to get rich. I'm going to get all this stock. But like, it seems like you're taking your life, how you balance everything, and then your passion and saying, hey, I'm going with it.
I think that's right. I think it's also, I spent the first 15, 20 years of my career, like very deeply focused on large scale distributed systems. And I mean, with the rise of the internet, that's what we needed to be really good at, right? We needed engineers who were really, really great at large scale distributed systems. And I learned a lot about how to build those systems and got good at it. And yet I saw that all of those learnings were being wrapped up into cloud computing, that it was not nearly as hard anymore to build large scale distributed systems. And so my skill set, I could have continued to build on that skill set, or I could say, hey, you know what, the next wave is really in AI and robotics, right? And I need to develop skills in that area, and I need to bring my kind of engineering and leadership ability, but into a new technical domain. And so that's what got me working with robotics originally at Amazon. That's what inspired me to join Scale AI and get really deep and for me, it's always been about applied. Like, I'm not on the theoretical research side. Like, Scale AI does amazing work for a wide diversity of customers, but in the kind of the ground level work of getting high quality data for these data sets. So for me, yeah, it's always about applied, but how do I learn the practice of building a large scale distributed system, or getting AI into the real world, or deploying robots at scale? And so, yeah, I think you have to keep learning, even more so now. I think maybe when I started my career, you could have one career in one area of expertise, but it's changing way too fast now.
And when we talk about robots, just so the audience knows, what type of robots are you building? Are they like Terminator robots? Are they the Boston Diagnostic dogs that just make flips and stuff? Or is it Rosie the robot from the Jetsons? Or what are you building?
Yeah, so we're building a robot to work in spaces designed for humans, really in solving the problem of moving things around the world, generally moving boxes, totes, trays, carts around the world. There's a huge amount of material movement. There's a lot of walking. These aren't these jobs are not the greatest jobs in the world, and they're hard physical labor, and we think they're automatable. But so it's really, the robot itself is not a humanoid robot, though volumetrically we think about the volume. A lot of the world is designed around generally how wide our shoulders are, the mobility characteristics that a human has. And so we think the robot we're building needs to, be able to fit through normal doorways, and then a lot of robots are like down at the ground level, down at your feet. That is not where humans are used to looking as they walk around. And so, our robot has some height to it. But yeah, we're not trying to build the kind of bipedal Terminator clone. There's a lot of practical benefits of, having 4 points of contact on the ground, using wheels, things like that. And so I'll be excited to reveal it once we're a little further along, but that's probably about as much as I'm willing to say right now.
And when you say help, so this will help, whether in your home maybe, or in what kind of places that they could help out?
Yeah, we're really targeting commercial spaces. So obviously logistics, warehousing, manufacturing are natural extensions of kind of the experience I have in logistics, but really trying to also bring it into airports, hotels, hospitals, schools, stadiums, these large spaces where there's just a lot of work goes on in moving things from point A to point B.
We say moving, like what would you, so let's say it's a hospital. Would you just be moving the different equipment to the hospital rooms and other places? How does that?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is it can be anything from, the mail or a food service, or supplies and specialized equipment, any and all of that.
I'm quite curious, right? Because you basically dedicated your entire career to like building new things and like being right at the kind of like cutting edge of things before they become mainstream, to be frank, right? And it seems like right now within tech, robotics, AI, like even my parents are talking about Chat GPT, which is insane. They don't know how to use their phone, but they know what Chat GPT is. Um, like how do you separate with your expertise? Can you help us separate like what is just too much hype or what is truly kind of going to be the next kind of quote unquote big thing with capital B, capital T?
Yeah, I mean, I do get this feeling every once in a while where it's like I know the world's about to change, right? And I got that feeling when I downloaded Netscape 0.9. I'm sitting in a MIT computer lab and I download it, and all of a sudden it's just wicked fast, right?
Right.
I had used Mosaic 1.0 or 2.0. It was really slow. And all of a sudden, like the web pages come up quickly. And there were only 20 websites at the time, but like they at least you could start to see. And then when they added JavaScript into kind of, I don't know, Netscape 1.5 or 2.0, like it was like, oh wow, this opens up everything. Like everything will be programmed on the web. And so I did. I saw it, and I like sought out the recruiter who was recruiting for Netscape, and basically pushed my resume in to try to get an opportunity there because I felt it, right? Um, I do feel that same thing right now with ChatGPT. I think it's I no none of us knew exactly how the internet and the browsers were going to change everything, but we also kind of knew they were going to, right? And I think I have that same sense with ChatGPT. I don't think it's overhyped. I think anyone who tells you they know exactly how it's going to play out over the next 5 years um, is at best guessing, right? We just don't really know. Um, and I think the thing people miss about chat, like it spits out great prose, but it's interactive, and that's the kind of shocking part of it, is that you can eat through the dialogue, you can teach chat gpt new things, and then it can incorporate it with the knowledge that it already has, and it's mind-blowing that it can do that. And so yeah, I don't know that I ever thought maybe in my lifetime that I could use completely natural language to teach a computer something brand new, but yeah, that's what we can do now. And so, as I said, I can't see all the possibilities of how exactly it plays out. We believe it has a significant role in human interaction with robots, and we're excited to pursue that avenue. But there are a lot of avenues where that technology is going to be really transformative.
I know because you're kind of in a stealth mode, but if you can answer this for yourself, if not just generally speaking, how would you infuse AI with robotics? How do, to a layman, how does that play out?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few things. I mean, obviously robots are sensing the world, right? They've got cameras, their lidars, and so they can see what's in the world, right? And they can, with these computer vision semantic segmentation models, you can understand what's going on in the world, and you can understand what's in there. So the idea that a robot could roll into a room and assess what's in that room um, is uh, is quite reasonable. But then the question is, if you want to, now that the robot has an understanding of the room and some of the things that are in the room, um, you can start to think about having a natural interaction with it, where you ask it to help you with something, right? And given that understanding of the room, given the understanding of who the people might be in the room, given an understanding of how to move around, what the robot itself has an internal model of what it's capable of doing, you can start to think of, really natural interactions with robots. And when we talk about collaborative, that's what we think about is how do we make it seamless? How do we make it natural? How do how does our robot help people in these commercial environments get things done more efficiently?
So let's take the example of the hospital you mentioned. So would it be with AI and robotics where maybe it comes into someone's room and they need to get some medicine, some shot or, what have you, that you could actually speak, a nurse could speak to it or the patient, hey, I need my IV drip, or, I need, it's time for me to get my shot, or even just to take my pills. And that robotics could then register, well, no, it's not. It has to be at 3 o'clock. It's not 3 o'clock yet, but at 3 o'clock, you can get the shot. So will you have the robot plus the ability to have that conversation back and forth to make sure you're doing everything what you should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think even 2 years ago, we would have said that sounded crazy and impossible, right? That it might be able to like do a very structured dialogue like with an Alexa, right? But I think what we're seeing with ChatGPT now is these large language models have a level of semantic understanding that they can, understand and give uh, and have a much more natural interaction. And so we're really excited to push push forward with that and try to make it as seamless and natural as possible.
I don't know about you, Rick. It's to me, it's like my mind is racing, like all the possibilities of how it works. Like even on a silly mundane thing, because you talked about stadiums, right? So you could have, instead of having to go and go up and go to the stands and order your hot dogs and order your whatever, you could just send that robot out there to say, hey, I want a hamburger, I want a beer, I want my fries, I want this, and it just gets it, it registers it. It could probably have a voice to say, hey, here's what I want. The robot will, the voice activator will say what I want. They'll give them somehow. I don't know how they'll do the financial transaction, but I'm sure that could work. And then they just come back, which is
Yeah, yeah,
wild. Is
yeah.
that possible? Is that like what could,
Yeah, I mean,
eventually
during a
happen?
big stadium event, it's a matter of like even we humans have trouble moving around in that
Yes.
environment. But so I think the more in the scenario you just described, the more challenging aspect of it is navigating the stadium and navigating all the people. The interaction that you just described, whether you pulled it up on your phone and did it, or whether you spoke to something and did it, that interaction, I think, is I joke sometimes that like we don't have a robot that can clear the dining, a table at a restaurant, right? That's an incredibly hard problem. But if you asked a few years ago, is it more likely that we'll have a robot that can pick up all the plates and dishes from the table first, or is it more likely we're going to have a robot that or an AI model that understands what it means to clean up all the dishes semantically from the table first? I don't know that 5 years ago we would have predicted that we'd have the type of semantic understanding that these large language models have before we have the ability to pick up forks and knives consistently.
And I'm quite curious about kind of stepping away from like robotics and AI is, right now there's kind of this like general sense of like uncertainty in terms of, what the next technology trends might be, how the like job market, how the economy is going to do. But you, despite this, started your own startup, right? And I want to dive deeper a little bit there and say, like, to be frank, is now a good time to join an early startup, right? Because the common wisdom seems to be, oh, now is the time to kind of like seek greener pastures, more stable industries, don't do anything reckless, don't do anything crazy. And kind of starting a startup amid that seems to be, against all of those things.
No, I mean, look, the economic cycles come and go, right? the reality is the technology transformation is not has not come and gone. That has been a accelerating growth kind of exponential curve throughout my lifetime, and is going to continue. And so if you align yourself to those trends and those growth curves, then the economy will sort itself out over time. And so I don't think it matters. I think the hard part with some of these economic cycles is that, you know, when money is flowing, when kind of cash is cheap in the way it was, it almost encourages you to be undisciplined, right? It encourages you to put a lot of bets down, right? And to be developing a lot of products in parallel. And it's the right thing to do because the environment's like that, right? And because, you know, if your cost of capital is that low, then, and you see a lot of opportunity to build into a new and novel space with a high return on capital, then you should be doing it. But you're pushed to go so fast that your ability to do it in a disciplined way, and be really sure that those bets are paying off and that you're paying enough attention to them is trickier, right? Everything is just go, 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 go. Grow and grow, right? And so I think the nice thing about these kind of tightening times in a startup is that you do spend a lot of time looking at your cash burn. You look at, you know, you think very carefully about, can I add one more person or not, right? And, you know, can I defer that expense out one more quarter till I've brought in a little bit more, you know, gotten further in this customer engagement. And so I think it, you know, it requires a heightened level of discipline. But I think if you have that discipline, particularly from the beginning, then it's really, yeah, then you're in a really great spot, and you built a business that has a great kind of foundation and culture. And then I think, I mean, the reality is, yeah, the smaller companies are not spending in kind of a runaway way, in part because they just haven't grown enough, right? So even if they raised and we raised last April, so we raised when it was still hot, right? But then it got cold in May, right? And so from the beginning, we've just been really disciplined about cash spend. And I think so a lot of smaller companies had an easier time just staying within the envelope of what they can afford to spend. And so you haven't seen as many layoffs from early stage seed or A round companies. You know, the folks at Series D or even in the public markets, particularly those who have been spending more than they're taking in, have had to dial that back because the funding sources aren't there to cover the gap. But no, I think I think it's always a great time to build a technology startup. But I think this environment enforces a level of discipline that's really healthy.
Is that why, like, you always hear these stories about some of the best companies were founded during tough times or recessions? I want to say like Airbnb, Hewlett Packard, right? Even Uber. There's so many of them because I guess you have to have that financial discipline right from the get-go to make sure it works, as opposed to for the last 10 plus years with artificially depressed interest rates, and you could get really cheap money at such a cheap rate, a borrowing cost, so that it's like drunken sailors just having just money to blow, and you never had that discipline for like 10 plus years. And now starting out, maybe, and this also probably also goes back to some of the other companies that were founded in recessionary times, where you just had to have that, you know, that mantra of like, hey, we got to be smart. We can't do anything dumb. We got to watch every dollar. We got to be careful. And then it probably sticks with you throughout the rest of, the life of the organization, because that's where the first principles were based upon. So maybe in a way, that's how you become successful, because, hey, we just got to be really good at this.
Yeah, and there are other factors as well. I mean, we're certainly we're able to hire some really, really great talent right now, that from other robotics programs that are slowing down or shutting down. And so that's great. I would say, last May, April, it was hard to find, April, May, June, July, it was hard to find robotics talent that was willing to leave some of the, the Amazons or the Googles or the Metas, but a bunch of those robotics programs have been shut down or curtailed, and so it's easier to hire some of that talent. And it's also the case that, yeah, there aren't, there, it might have been that had the market continued the way it was, that the venture community would have funded 5 more almost identical looking startups to what we're starting, all in the next 6 months.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think that's, I didn't
and
rush,
so
but that's, wow. That's because
we
like,
have
that's what
less.
happened, right? Like last, 5 plus whatever years, you would have one cool company and then you'd be kind of knockoffs, like 5 others doing the same thing. And in a way, if you do it now, you stand out. You probably won't have that.
That's right.
Huh.
That's the hope. That's the. So I think, yeah, starting now does have some benefits. Obviously, starting when you can get access to great capital, if you know how to manage that well too, that's a nice problem as well, right? You can grow quickly, and if you've got a good market and a good opportunity. It's just that, access to a lot of cash also kind of can accentuate your mistakes as well. And so I think in any environment, it's about execution and discipline, and really great companies are built in both environments. But there's, there is a mantra that you want to invest in teams, great teams with great execution, and I think that's just true independent of the economic cycle.
Speaking about that kind of focus on just like executing and really just focusing on impact, you were one of a handful of distinguished engineers at Amazon. We have over 120,000 Amazon professionals on Blind. Can you give us some advice in terms of like, how do we get to that first director level, vice president level, and then distinguished engineer? Like, what does that kind of like career arc look like?
Yeah, well, first, shout out to everyone at Amazon. I've always been a huge Amazon fan. I have a lot of friends still there. Amazing time there. Yeah, I mean, I think I've been reflecting on this because I've had even employees who've joined us have kind of asked how I've built my career and how I've approached it. And what I would say is I'm fundamentally like a company first person, right? I always think, how do I help the company get better? I'm not someone who's like, how do I make the next promotion? How do I think about how do I help make the company better? And what are the big problems that the company needs to solve? Some of which maybe I see before other people do. Maybe some of which are just in the discussion. We know this problem's emerging in the business. And then, I have a certain set of skills, technical skills, and then over time, increasing people leadership skills. So how can I take my skills and the company's biggest, most interesting problems, and how do I put myself in a position when there is a big problem that the company has and I have the skills to help solve it? How do I find myself in a position where I can raise my hand and offer to help solve that problem? And so usually what I'm doing is, and this is what I did at Amazon, it's I'll identify, we'll line up. So for instance, the e-commerce platform transformation. Amazon had quickly grown its stack. The company had quickly grown, and yet the ambition was to become the everything store. And it turns out that selling books and renting digital subscriptions on a Fire TV device are just very different payment models, very different catalogs, very different order. And then you start to add, hey, we're going to sell groceries and we're going to sell meat by weight, right? And all these kind of interesting complexities come up. And so Amazon had a challenge that its homegrown system was not as flexible and adaptable to the different countries it was expanding to, the different categories it was expanding to, the different kinds of e-commerce it wanted to be able to do. And I had this experience from Netscape and from Tellme, and kind of from my first year at Amazon in how to refactor systems between what were the common pieces and what were the dimensions where you need flexibility. How do you kind of turn something into a platform where there's a lot that's foundational, but there's a lot that you can adapt and change? And I happen to have the skills to do that from my experience. And I happen to recognize that Amazon was trying to figure out how to do that. And when the role became open to be the e-commerce platform architect, I happened to be in a position where, you know, I could transition to that role without leaving the other things that I was doing in a lurch. And so, and then I worked on that problem for a few years. And then when we had a lot of that kind of transformation under control, all of a sudden Amazon went on 60 Minutes. Jeff Bezos went on 60 Minutes to announce his drone program. And I, you know, as a kid, I had a deep passion in kind of radio controlled planes and helicopters. If I hadn't gone this computer science direction, I would have gone aero-astro. But I happened to be in a spot where the work that I was doing was in pretty good shape, and yet there was this new program that was super ambitious, super hard. And so again, I raised my hand and said, hey, can I help on get Prime Air going, and spent a year doing that. And then there was this, you know, new challenge of, hey, we're going to put a new shopping day. We're going to put Prime Day in the middle of the summer. And how do we make the systems all ready for that? And I, you know, the first year at Amazon, I had operated the website. I obviously understood the e-commerce platform stack. I understood a lot about the AWS systems, how to scale it. And so I said, yeah, I can help us get ready for Prime Day. And I ran tech readiness for the first 3 Prime Days. But then there was this other big challenge, which is we were deeply dependent on Oracle databases throughout the systems. And yet there was fragility around those. The relationship with Oracle was mixed at best, I would say. And we made the strategic decision, Jeff Wilkie and his leadership team, and it ended up being Jeff Bezos and Andy Jassy as well, all agreed we were going to move Oracle out of, like, we were going to take all of our stuff off of Oracle databases. And so I had this large scale architectural transformation. It was a big problem. And I said, I think I can do that for the company through the leadership skills that I developed. And then in 2017, we did this analysis that said, by 2021, Amazon will have 1 million employees, which was shocking at the time. I think we were just over 200,000 at the time. And we didn't even know if there were 1 million people who would be willing to work for Amazon, right? It wasn't a matter of, oh, that's great, we're going to create 1 million jobs. It's like if we create 1 million jobs, are there 1 million people who want them, right? And how is that going to work? And I mean, obviously Amazon did that. They blew through those 9. I think they're over 1.5 million now. But that meant we needed to really double down in robotics and go much faster there. And I said, look, I have a lot of software experience. I have a lot of leadership experience. I have a lot of large-scale architectural transformation experience. I know next to nothing about robotics or operations, right? I'm going to have to learn those pieces. But, you know, I had developed a reputation. I had developed the skills, the range of skills. The company had a big problem. And I raised my hand. And there are times I've raised my hand in my career and the company doesn't think I'm the right person to solve that problem, right? And that's fine, right? There are plenty, you know, if you're in a fast growing company, there are plenty of interesting problems. So that's how I've grown my career, is always to think about the company, the problems the company's trying to solve, my skills, and then try to put myself in a position every couple of years where I'm not, deeply ingrained in the past problems. I always think about, how do I engineer what I'm currently doing so that eventually I engineer myself out of that job and it kind of self-sustains so that I can go help solve the next biggest problem for the company. And then along the way, usually I'm doing things at a scale and an impact where the promotions kind of come as a side effect of just doing great work. Sometimes I do have to, I have gone to my manager at times and say, hey, I think the impact I'm doing maybe is distinguished engineer level. Like, if you don't think that, could you give me some feedback? So I do think people have to be advocates, but I'm certainly someone who advocates probably to, I try to advocate when it becomes painfully obvious that, that promotion is merited, and versus trying to advocate 2 or 4 years before the promotion is merited on, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What's the checklist? I'm like, no, let me just keep solving bigger and bigger problems. And then the problems I'm solving are at distinguished engineer scope. And then I think the promotion case becomes easy to write.
I love this track record of like kind of thinking globally, right? And raising your hand and just doing it, and trying to say like, hey, I don't necessarily have these skills, right? Like with robotics, but I can learn, and I've learned these other things very quickly. Because I think it's very easy to get into this trap of, with layoffs, we've heard of stories out there in news media, like, how are these like quirky or like life hacks to just keep your job and stay out of the crosshairs of a layoff. And one thing that I keep seeing all the time is, oh, well, if you're the only one that can do this certain process or this certain thing, then that's job security. But here you are recommending, well, I'm actually going to engineer ways for me to get out of that job. Like, how did you kind of realize that was the key?
Uh, there's this like children's book, like I think it's Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel or something. I remember reading it as a kid, and the whole idea is that this steam shovel comes along and like, creates the whole city, but then the technology gets replaced by this diesel engine. And so that steam shovel becomes like the furnace in the basement of one of those buildings. And ever since I read that book as a kid, I've never wanted to be that steam shovel.
Oh,
It's like very deep. Like, I do not want to be like embedded in the infrastructure of the building. I want to help build the building, and then I want to help move to the next one. And so I don't know, something about that like clicked for me as a kid. And I realized it a few years ago when I saw that book again. So I have a copy on my desk at home just to remind me, like, don't build yourself into, you're building technology. You're not building yourself into that technology. And so so it's been really visceral for me, but it's also just been, I also, I want to move on to the next thing after a couple of years. I don't want to be stuck. And so, making sure that you engineer your way, a path to letting other people grow and take on that work. Because for people who are earlier, that work is the next step up for them, right? And for me, I'm looking for the next big problem.
Yeah, that's so amazing, because at first I was thinking, as you're kind of relaying your story, that you're like Forrest Gump, but I mean that in a positive way, like being in the right place at the right time, like in Netscape rather. But then as you're going on, I'm like, no, it's not that. It's like, we're going to think forward and just raise your hand. And the way you talk about it, it seems so simple, but for many people, it's really hard to raise your hand and say, I think I can do this. I want to do this. Here's how I can do it. Here's why, and then list all your qualities to do it. And as you pointed out, sometimes you'll get it, sometimes you won't. And I think that's a great lesson. That's like, you've given a whole lot to unpack for people who are watching this now. And I would encourage people to watch this a few times to really soak up everything. But one of the kernels that I'm taking away is that you were just confident in your abilities, but not cocky, but you felt self-assured, and you were going to try, knowing that they may say to you at times, no, thank you. We don't need your help. There's somebody else. Rick is really good at that. He's going to do it. But to be brave enough to just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to take a stab at it. And then if you do a good job, that leads to another good job and so forth. And that's what I think a lot of people need to know, because in what's going on now, and Rick, I see this on Blind, where a lot of people just feel deflated because of this swift change of events. But that's all you need to do is be in the game and keep trying. And then I think the breaks come for you. If you give up, nothing will happen. But if you keep trying and trying and trying, things will open up for you. Right. And that seems to kind of be what was for you, man. It was great that, like, you're like, all right, let me give this a shot. Let me try it.
Yeah, and if you position yourself in a high growth space, right? It's not like basketball where there are only 5 people on the floor, right? Uh they're
Right.
always looking for more engineers to put in the game, right? And so the yeah, you just have to be in the high growth space. And then you might go through these short periods where it's a little bit musical chairs and some people don't have a chair. In tech, though, it grows so fast that I mean, I think these companies will be hiring again quickly in Q2, right? And everyone I know who's been caught up in these already has multiple offers and trying to decide what to do because um yeah, because there's just the tech transformation is so big that there are so many opportunities. But I do think you have to put yourself out there. You have to, I mean, a story on that related to Netscape. I didn't realize Netscape was coming on campus at MIT, so I did not put my resume in advance. And you at that time in the career office, you were supposed to put your resume in like 6 weeks in advance, and then the company came out and did it. And so I went to the career office that morning when I put my resume in, with a note on it that said, because I didn't have a scheduled slot, but I said, if you know, if you can fit me in today, I'm really, really interested in Netscape, call this phone number, right? Because at the time nobody had like a mobile device. They weren't going to text, right? They were going to call my dorm phone. They were going to leave a voicemail, right? And then I was going to call it remotely and check it. And so that's what I did. I like every hour during that day, I called my phone. I called my voice message to see if anyone had called, and no one had called. No one had called, right? And like 2:30 in the afternoon, I go to the library, I'm studying, I call, I check, nothing, and I'm like, okay, I mean, it's pretty much over, right? And and then I'm studying for a while, and then I fall asleep for a bit right there in the racks, right? And I wake up and it's like 4:15. And I'm like, well, let me just call. And sure enough, the Netscape recruiter had called me at about 3:15 and said, if you can be here at 4, we've got a
Oh
slot.
no.
And it's 4:15. So I just grabbed my backpack and I just ran down there and said, if she'd be willing to talk to me. And sure enough, like, she was gracious, she was willing to talk to me. And then she liked my profile and flew me out to Netscape to interview on site, and that's how I got my internship at Netscape. But yeah, the point is, if you see that opportunity and you want it, like, again, it's not a pushy thing. I wasn't being overly aggressive, but I was trying to raise my hand and say I'm really interested. And yeah, those things have just worked out for me, on more than one occasion. So yeah, there is an intentionality to it. It's not just good fortune. There's recognizing opportunity, and that's Siri. And then putting yourself out there.
That's really good advice. And just to add to what you're saying, so it's also finding an area that's fast growing, because
Yeah.
I'd imagine if you had interests in another sector that was just kind of like the railroad industry, I don't know, whatever is just not really fast and dynamic, your career might not have taken off that way. But if you seek out, for the people who are watching this, like, if you find, it does, I guess, tech, but it could be other sectors, but it sounds like you really want to find something that's really has some growth potential. Plus, I hear when you talk about it, you could just feel it, right, Rick? Like, you're passionate about what you do, so like you enjoy it. So then another feature, you could be a fast growing industry, but if you don't really have the heart in it, it may not work. So if you're passionate about it and you're really excited about it, then all of a sudden you're on your way, right?
I mean, I
Exactly.
was kind of a sucker for those that aren't watching and are only listening. I was on the edge of my seat, even though Brad kind of telegraphed where the story was going, and obviously I read his bio. I knew he ended up at Netscape, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like you didn't get a call all day. You fell asleep in the library. And I just think that like is so powerful, right? Where just not having that ego, right? And then saying like, I'm just gonna go for it. I'm gonna admit my mistake and really just persevere. And I think right now, especially if you're at a larger company or you're in, a function that's like pretty well established, right? Like you're just a software engineer. It's very clear. I'm going to code in XYZ languages. I'm going to work on this stack. It can get really easy to kind of fall into this like, well, there's a career hierarchy. And if I just stay 2 years here, someone's going to move me along to a bigger project where I might be able to get on a bigger team. And you're just kind of just riding almost like a lazy river, right? Instead of treating it as like a career ladder. And I mean, is there do you have any advice for these engineers that like might feel like, oh well, I'm in the middle. Maybe I feel like I'm plateauing in my career. Like, how do I like reach that next level?
Yeah, I think it's I'm an Eagle Scout as well. I did the whole merit badges, the whole progression thing. Like careers don't work like that, right? That's not like promotions and things aren't check boxes, right? I think of it as you demonstrate increasing levels of judgment, increasing levels of autonomy, and the ability to take on bigger and bigger problems, and an increased level of kind of perceived leadership amongst your peers. And if you do those things, it doesn't really matter whether you're an executive business partner or an engineer or an AI scientist. Like if you can keep demonstrating that you can take on more and more autonomously, again, if you're in a growing company, if you're in a growing space, they have more and more problems coming up. And people are always like, and I see this even more, in robotics, I was leading, a 4,000 person R&D organization. So, I got the vantage of being on top of a large organization. When you're sitting on top of a large organization or you're a manager of a small team, it doesn't matter. You recognize that you have more problems to solve than you have capacity in the organization to solve. Right. And so particularly if that's a timely, urgent thing, then you're looking around, you can't, to hire a new leader, to hire someone else is going to take months, right? And you want to get started sooner, you're going to look around and say, is there anyone in the organization that has the capacity, um, the the skills really, and to maybe it's a little bit of a stretch, but is likely to do a good job at this role? Um, and are they available? Because I can't pull them out if they're, the steam furnace in that building, right? If they're keeping that critical function running, like I can't pull them out. But if they've actually got that function running pretty well, such that they could step out, then yeah, as a leader, you're always going to look for those people. And so if you're in a growing space with new problems, new things coming up, then your management is always looking around saying, who can help? And sometimes you nudge it by raising your hand, right? And often I'm like raising my hand, even sometimes 6 months in advance, and saying, I've kind of got my stuff in a good spot, right? And so, if there are other things that you'd like me to look at or consider, let me know. And that just signals, hey, I've got capacity. So don't worry, I'm not, this thing would be well handled even if I moved to something else. And just by signaling that, when those conversations come up to say, hey, who could we get to do this? Right. I didn't have the robotics experience, but I happened to be in a spot where, that Oracle migration and that tech readiness for Prime Day and some of those things I was handling were in a good spot, and I could hand them off, and I could take on robotics, and I could take it on right now. Right. And, they could have opened a position and tried to find a leader. And, and spent months recruiting, but I was there and I managed to get that opportunity. So I think, yeah, you need to be in a high growth space, need to build the capacity, and then be available. And then, yeah, you get pulled along. And then and then I think it also becomes obvious that you should be promoted and things like that. But promotion, again, I think you always have to look at it in the company, the business, your manager has problems that they need solved. And if you have capacity to help them solve them, then you get opportunities, right? If you look at it as like, hey, this is the checklist, like give me an opportunity to check off this one thing that I know I need to do for the promotion document. I don't know I mean, I suppose there are probably businesses that work that way. But that's not how I built my career.
As a manager, because how many people did you oversee? It was a lot, right?
Yeah, I had 4,000 in R&D. It was about 10,000 globally.
10,000 is a lot to manage.
Yeah,
Right?
it's a big org.
So how from your side then as a manager, and I know you're saying like raise the hand, what do you look for? What can somebody do, who's listening now, like, hey, how do I get on, your radar, whether it's, Brad or whoever your manager is, like, without being like a kiss up or being like weird, how do you shine? How do you get noticed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that you look for the big problems that the company has that you think you can help solve. And if you're working on some of the bigger problems, then you're naturally visible because that's what the leadership's paying attention to, right?
So you got to to navigate it. You have to kind of play the game a little bit, right? And find what's important, what's the big issue, what's the next big thing, and see how somehow you can get on that project, how you can kind of get involved somehow to ingratiate yourself.
Yeah, there's not one.
Yeah.
When I was working for Jeff Wilkie directly, when that robotics thing came up, there were 20 other problems he was trying to solve and looking for leaders for as well, right? Just happened to be that one was the one that was most interesting to me and most fit to my skills. And but if that hadn't been the one, I would have done something else kind of in hopefully in his top 10, top 20 list. And again, so I'm not like, I was never trying to get on Jeff Bezos's radar, right? I'm never trying to I'm trying to make sure I'm doing the right thing for the company and generally for my manager. And if Jeff Bezos knew who my name was, that's great. I interacted with him a few times, presented a few times, but I was never the objective function was to try to become visible to Jeff Bezos. The objective function was keep solving really interesting big problems for the company and then assume that the rest of it will take care of itself.
It makes a lot of sense.
I really like that approach, right? Because I think rather than thinking of it as a game, it's just here, let's just see what problems are ahead and how can I plug myself in, right? And sometimes it might not be all the way. I can't take you to 100%, but maybe I can take you 30, 40, 50 and bring in other people, right? Because I think those going back to your kind of steam engine furnace analogy, I think sometimes people forget, oh, well, if I leave and go to kind of something that will stretch me, I'm also opening up a spot for career growth for someone else, right? Where maybe someone else can stretch in, right? And that company is still able to survive and continue, they still have that vital or weird function or process, but it keeps going, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, I feel like we could go all day, but yeah, I'm really grateful for your wisdom here, Brad. Thanks for kind of giving us that sneak peek in terms of how to actually demonstrate impact at scale and really how to level up our career.
Awesome. It's great talking to you both. This has been awesome.
Thank you. This is great. I really appreciate it, Brad. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Brad.